The 9th edition 40k previews continue, and now we have a little better view of what terrain is going to look like in the new edition. Although it does have some folks scratching their heads over how it actually works. So today, let's review the new terrain rules we've seen so far and how they're actually going to play on the table. What's up, folks? Welcome back to Tactical Tortoise. My name, as always, is Trevi, and today we're talking terrain. This video was actually requested by one of my patrons over at Patreon. You can join them and request video topics yourself over at patreon.com/tacticaltortoise, or enjoy the other cool benefits like exclusive videos, early access to videos, and early access to T5S2 tournament pods. So let's talk about 9th edition's terrain rules that have been previewed so far and how they actually work. So according to their June 11th Warhammer community article, terrain in the new edition will rely less on the broad categorization that 8th edition used, which eventually just evolved into just woods, craters, and ruins, and instead will allow players to determine keywords for their terrain that confer rules attributes. For example, multi-level ruins on a battlefield may have the scalable keyword to allow models to traverse between them, but Nova L-style structures without those levels would not. Each feature would still have a terrain category, but it's simplified to just 4: area terrain, hills, obstacles, and buildings. From the previews we've seen so far, hills are basically just areas of the board with no verticality and are mechanically the same as just open ground. Obstacles encompass things like walls and trenches that protect infantry, and area terrain confers benefits to units inside it, just like 8th edition. Buildings are still a mystery, as we've seen no spoilers for the rules yet, so while it's possible that they may work like an ITC building that functions identically to an enclosed ruin, they may have more complex mechanics representing occupying, storming, or defending them. The most exciting keyword previewed so far is obscuring, which represents a departure from GW's normal, toxic, true line-of-sight design philosophy. So here's how obscuring works. Firstly, it only applies to 5-inch tall terrain features, so if they're too short, I guess it's basically a worthless keyword. If the terrain qualifies, it blocks line of sight that is traced over it to all units that are behind it but not touching it. Period. End of story. Unfortunately, this means that something resembling true line of sight will likely still be in the game, and since the lines traced to determine line of sight with this rule refers to models specifically, unless there are some other rules governing line of sight we haven't seen yet, all the issues that true line of sight brings with it will still remain. Which, you know, it kind of sucks. Aircraft and big units with 18 or more wounds are not blocked by obscuring terrain, but it's worth noting that line of sight will still be able to be physically blocked by the terrain as normal. So, even if you're a Titan, a giant Nova L-style ruin is gonna block line of sight to you if it's large and solid enough. Now, I should note that this creates some bizarre interactions with some venues' existing terrain sets and will need to be house ruled or refined in the rulebook. For example, a lot of collections mount their ruins on giant pre-cut 12x12 MDF bases to save time, and while in 8th edition this wasn't an issue, beyond giving infantry more of an area of the board to get cover in sometimes, which was fine, now it means that units will have to stand entirely behind that giant MDF area to have LOS blocked to them by the ruin at all. In addition, since the base itself is considered the area terrain for the feature, it blocks line of sight itself, despite having virtually no vertical presence, which will additionally create some awkward situations on its own. Alternatively, if your ruins have no base, essentially they're just GW terrain kits straight out of the box, line of sight through them will always be blocked to and from models that aren't physically on top of the feature, such as on a second floor or something similar. And while this probably isn't a huge issue, given essentially it's how ITC plays ruins currently in 8th edition, it is weird to consider that under no circumstances can your units shoot through the windows they're defending, unless it's at a Titan or an airplane specifically. I imagine we'll see a house rule along the lines of models within an inch of a ruin's walls are considered to be within the area of the terrain feature become popular, or just a shift in the community to more reasonable terrain basing in the not too distant future. The same article also gives some examples of the types of cover that terrain can provide, that being light and heavy. I mentioned in another recent video how silly I think this naming convention is, and I definitely stand by that. Light cover adds 1 to your save against ranged attacks, while heavy cover does the same for melee attacks, provided that the attacking model didn't charge that turn. I guess charging models got too much momentum for a stack of boxes and a brick to save you from them or something like that. What's interesting is that it looks like the obstacle terrain will provide cover to infantry that is behind it at any distance. So we may see low walls, defense lines, and Prometheum pipelines return to the table and greatly benefit infantry that already have decent armor saves. Earlier this week, GW dropped the Tyranids preview article, which contained basically no information for actual Tyranid players, but spoiled some more terrain rules, specifically the dense cover keyword, which, instead of benefiting armor saves, makes the unit harder to hit. I imagine this keyword is meant to be used in conjunction with forests, underbrush, smoky areas of the battlefield, etc. And I absolutely love that it's been made mechanically distinct from actual hardcover. But how does it work exactly? First of all, like obscuring terrain, this terrain has a height requirement of 3 inches. Kind of a weird height, but I'm into it, it's fine. Also like obscuring terrain, and while it's apparently left out of the rule itself, elsewhere in the article it's mentioned that it doesn't benefit aircraft or models with 18 plus wounds. The terrain applies a -1 to hit penalty to an attacker if the defending unit's bases are entirely behind or inside the terrain feature, i.e., no lines can be drawn between the attacker and defender's bases that don't pass over it. They again use the 1mm thick line nomenclature here, which, I mean, is entirely unnecessary, but at least they're templating something. Additionally, the attacker ignores the penalty if they're on top of the terrain piece, which makes sense because they can shoot through it, or they're within 3 inches of a dense cover providing obstacle since they're much smaller and harder to get on top of. I think it's extremely important to note that unlike obscuring terrain, this rule specifies lines are drawn between bases, not models, which diverges it from the pseudo-true line of sight that obscuring terrain uses. I hope this becomes the norm for LOS effects, and maybe we'll see a clarification down the road that brings these two mechanics together, not just because measuring between bases is much better in every way, but also because having two nearly identical rules with only one small divergence is added complexity that doesn't really improve gameplay. This was a terrain rule that had people worried and was a little controversial within the community for its complexity. While I applaud Games Workshop's designers for finally writing a terrain rule that isn't total shit, the bullet points in the article do a much better job of illustrating the rule than its actual wording does. As a side note, a good way to handle this complexity without losing precision would be writing a 5 to 10 page beginner rules or reference document where everything in the game is broken down into conversational bullet points like these ones, while the actual verbiage is reserved for a more serious document that you can reference if a question arises during gameplay. Even if Games Workshop themselves doesn't see fit to publish something like that, I'm sure the community will step up to assemble it to assist new or returning players and alleviate confusion. After all, the community does do the lion's share of work fixing GW's constantly broken rule sets. Anyway, I hope this video helped you understand the spoiled terrain rules a little better, and helped you prepare for some of the strange interactions that may arise once 9th edition is actually released. Let me know down in the comments what you think of the new spoiled terrain rules. Are you excited to see terrain have more of an impact on the game, or are you worried it'll be a little too complicated? I, for one, hope the full rules have more clarification regarding terrain in line of sight. I'd love to see the draw lines between bases rule entirely supplant existing line of sight rules, but we'll have to see the full rules to find out. Thanks again for watching, and big thanks to all my Patreon supporters for helping me create this content and requesting this video. Remember, you can join them at patreon.com/tacticaltortoise to get all the sweet benefits I mentioned earlier in the video. And remember also to like and subscribe, do all that cool YouTube stuff, and keep it classy, folks. Happy wargaming!